So in this project, I want to give you just an introduction and an overview of just the beginning of this project that we're going to be working on for the rest of the semester. Um, and let me try and just do two things in this first slide. Is just, think about this question, right? Who wants change versus who wants to change? And this is supposed to be delegates of the United Nations. So, everybody wants change, right? Everybody says, oh, things need to change. We need to make a change. And then as soon as it's like, well, what are you doing to make the change? Everybody says, oh, I don't want to do anything. So one reason for doing an assignment like this is to start to get you to think about, like, what are the changes that you're interested in? And then how do you see what needs to be done in order for that change to occur, both in your individual life, in your community, and then maybe at a broader community, whether it's New York City or the country, or in some cases the globe, depending on kind of what injustice or what legal issue you're kind of thinking about. And so I've done this work with students for over 10 years now, and the most consistently creative and well thought out projects that students do always kind of involve two things. One being choice, that you have the choice to kind of work on things that are interesting to you, and then also to give you choice as far as how it's going to be presented. So I found out about zines. I knew about zines from other areas, but I hadn't thought about it in the educational sense. And so I thought, this last year I heard about this, people using this at an institution I taught at, and then at other places. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. Why don't we try this out? And this could be like a low stakes assignment that gives you some choice in how you present. The first thing you kind of got to think about, and this is information I've gathered from students over the last few years, is that, when I ask you, like, what groups are you a part of, or how would you define your community, you'll see, like, some students say none, right, which is really discouraging for me. I'd prefer you say I'm unsure, right, you might not know, and then this class will help you think about it. But I put in bold, most students know what groups they're a part of, whether that's a political group, whether that's a employment-based group, whether that's a religious group, whether that's an ethnic group, whether it's a racial category. Most folks have some sense of, like, what group they're a part of or what social groups claim them. So then we think, okay, so what's a zine? Well, I think you can think about zines in the same way as comic books or graphic novels as they used to be before you saw kind of all of these Hollywood films based on the superhero, right? So comic books used to be like the underground. They used to be kind of the counterculture, and a lot of times adults would kind of make fun of them. Now that does not seem to be the case, but the idea is that this should be simple and not overproduced. So this is not, I'm not asking you to do a 12-page research paper, and I'm not asking you to do anything that would be highly complicated. This is try to keep it as simple as possible, because the goal of a project like this is to provide something that would be useful to ordinary folks who are oftentimes in powerless or non-elite communities. So you think about folks that wouldn't normally have access to legal knowledge, we can provide this to them in that form. So on the website, I've provided you with a link to the Barnard School at Columbia University, and they have a Zine Library, which I find to be pretty fascinating. And I just took a snapshot of the first 12 of a huge list that they have. And these are all hyperlinks that take you to those examples of what zines are. And as you can see, they cover a wide variety. This is just an alphabetical order, and you can already see there's a wide variety of different issues that people can look at. And then here's just 3 examples of the zines I pulled down. Each one was about anywhere from as short as like 4 pages long to some that are a little bit longer, depending on kind of the format you're using. And so you can use pictures, right? You can make, one person made a coloring book here, you see, and then the other one was kind of put more in poetry format. So to get started, that's all I'm asking you today, is just to get started. Think about a legal topic that a powerless community might care about. And there's a ton, right? Because it's an election year and because of the Black Lives Matter movement, there are a lot of issues that are kind of coming to the front on the political level. Then you also have COVID-19, which has brought up a lot of persistent inequities and injustices in the healthcare system, again, along racial lines and also in gendered communities. So there's a lot you could choose from, and that could be overwhelming, but think of it as liberating, right? Like you have the choice to kind of study anything and it will relate back to sociology and law. And then think about it this way. How does your lived experience compare to that community experience? And I'm not suggesting that you have to necessarily be a part of that the community. So for example, I'm a white male of privilege, but that doesn't stop me from seeing what it's like in the Black community, say in South Seattle or in Brooklyn. And it doesn't stop me from doing work with migrants or with Spanish-speaking folks. So the idea is just to make sure that you're thinking about it in those terms, right? So know your audience is kind of what they say in speech, and that's what we're thinking about here is think about your lived experience and then try to compare that and contrast that to the broader community that you're studying. And then think about what are the legal issues, right? There's likely going to be more than one, as you've seen kind of in the readings you've done so far. And just, in your brainstorm, just kind of come up with a list, right? I don't think it needs to be more than 5, right? And if you only see one, that's okay too. But just really think about it. Like, what's the difference between the social issues versus the legal issues? In other words, how could law actually be used in this circumstance? And then just start some basic research. And, I don't really care at the beginning how you start your research, right? Wikipedia is fine to start your research, but certainly don't cite to that later on. And then if you're really struggling, just email me and I can give you some suggestions based on stuff that I've done. And then just think about the best way to present this information. Again, is it going to be a coloring book? Is it going to be more graphics, like more visual? Would you rather do something like I'm doing now, where it's like audio? You'll have to think about what's best for you and then what would be the best to reach that targeted community. And then please, 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 do not give me facts and figures, right? Like, don't give me an infographic that you collect from Google and present that as your own work. Don't copy and paste stuff from other websites. I really want this to be your own stuff. And please don't give me fake news, right? So something I've been talking about if you've been participating in extra credit is this idea that anyone's burning any cities down. It's ridiculous hyperbole. It's not happening. And if you really want to see what it's like to see a city burned down, then look at World War II and look at the atomic bombs dropped in Japan, or look at the firebombing of Dresden in Germany. That's what it looks like to burn a city down. There's also firebombing in Cambodia. If you're interested in that, you can see like what it looks like. So this is not even remotely close to the same thing, and using that kind of language is not scientific, and it's certainly not academic. It's purely entertainment, and it's very offensive entertainment. Do please, 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 right, if you want to get a good grade, use the class materials. So especially those 3 readings that we've gone through so far, and then the information I'm going to continue to give you. But you're, of course, welcome to use things that you find in your own research, but I'm really going to be grading you on these 4 kind of principles and how you use that research in your presentation and in your zine. So first one you're going to learn is about legal language. The second thing is going to be about the usage of that legal language. The third will be grammar and context, and the fourth will be abduction applied, which means taking legal reasoning and applying it to your situation. Again, I'm going to help you with this, and you can always Zoom with me or email me, and we can kind of go through these steps together. But I'm going to be introducing each of these sections over the next few weeks, starting with legal language specifically applied to the courts and the structural history of the courts. And so I'll get you to practice this in steps. So you're not expected to do all 4 of these things right away. And then you're going to need to synthesize this, and that means take all of this and put it together, integrate it together. And you'll need to make multiple drafts, right? This is not something that you can do at the last minute and expect to get a good grade. You're going to need to get feedback from me. You're going to have to get feedback from classmates, and you're going to have to present as your final exam. And so this really needs to be something that you're proud of and that you think that is a good representation of the work you're doing. So finally, just a brief review. In Blackstone's commentaries, the things that I'm really hoping that you'll focus on is really going back through that reading and saying, okay, what were the ways in which Blackstone brought the laws to more folks in England? I've read a few of your drafts, and a lot of you, or those of you who sent me your drafts, you did a good job of identifying how this was a shift. Some of you got a little bit of the history a little bit mixed up, but that's understandable. But the idea here is that Blackstone wanted to bring the laws to an academic arena and not just within the king's courts. The Judiciary Act is similar, and that was bringing the law to folks in colonial America, specifically through this idea of self-government, and making it accessible to something like farmers, and not necessarily the legal language, although that was partially the intent of people like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, and then later on Andrew Jackson. But the idea here was just that law would be accessible to people, so that farmers would believe that they had rights and that they could engage in the political process. And then the fire this time about Black Lives Matters, I know that people are getting confused because of things that they see in the quote-unquote news, and then also on quote-unquote social media. Try to focus on the academic article, and make comparisons to this movement now to the civil rights movement, where people were saying all sorts of negative things about those folks as well. So I think people, the counter movement is always going to frame the movement as being immoral, illegal, and out of control. But you have to bring it back to reality, calm it down, and just kind of try to understand that when folks are resisting, that means that they've had enough, right? Like this has gone too far, and now they feel that they must use their legal rights, the First Amendment among many, to actually bring these issues to the front. And so that's really what you see in this article. He's talking about bringing laws to more folks, including Black and brown communities, who, if you don't remember, in addition to women, were not allowed to vote in previous generations. And so in the 60s and the 50s, when they were making this fight, this was largely about just bringing the promises of democracy and the law to more people. So then finally, just remember that the whole point of these first three readings is that you understand that the movements are forms of legal resistance and the counter movements are forms of legal control. And they're both in contrast with each other, oftentimes in a hypocritical and contradictory way, but both are legally constituted and legal. So in other words, you can't say, I know people are saying it, but they're wrong. They're legally wrong and they're scientifically wrong. They might believe they're right. But the politics of it is saying something like, well, these people are destroying property. Well, what do you mean by these people, right? That's a problematic term in the first place. But that's kind of like saying, for those of you who are in criminal justice, who I think is most of you, that's kind of like saying, like, someone who goes in to shoplift some sneakers at the age of 14 had some kind of political agenda when they were doing it. So the crime itself would have been shoplifting, right? But you don't attack the person, you attack the crime, right? So the act was, and you know this, of course, actus reus. When people say, like, I could say something like, an arsonist burned a building, right? Which, of course, there must have been 1,000 of those across the country, and 98 of them didn't get into the news. 2 of them might have occurred, and they didn't burn the entire place down, from what I saw. But let's say a car, right? Because an NYPD car was burned in Brooklyn over these protests. First of all, there is no legal evidence that's been put forward about who did this. So simply just to associate it with the protests is legally incorrect and has never been proved. So the point being here is that, sure, the act of burning a car, even your own car, by the way, you go out in the middle of the field and burn your car, that's still legal, should be separate from the human being, and whatever labeling or stereotypes that you're making. So the idea is just try to remember that, resistance is legal and is a part of so-called law and order. And I'm not talking about the racist version of law and order there. I'm talking about the idea that, you establish order through law, right? But the more people who can participate in the law, the more fair the law will be. When people aren't able to participate in the law, that's when you'll see resistance, especially legal resistance in the form of protest. And in some cases, if you try to put it back, the founders, right, the American Revolutionary War started off with people not just throwing tea into the ground, but burning, English ships, with burning encampments, right? And so, this is not a brand new legal concept that somehow, is particular to this time and period. This is a thousands of year old strategy. And I think when people are angry, just like if a child was angry, you'd expect there to be some, I don't want to say, basically you'd expect there to be some consequences, right? That people are going to use that anger and direct it. Now, I'm not taking a moral position here, but law is not about morals, right? This isn't a religious institution. And so I think you just need to try to separate this out as you move forward so you can kind of stay clear-headed and try to think like a judge in this particular case.